All eyes were on us the moment we walked through those ornate double doors. Not on the bride in her flowing white gown, not on the groom with his nervous smile, but on me, the assistant who had somehow become the +1 of the most eligible bachelor in the city, and my boss, whose hand rested confidently on the small of my back. I could feel the weight of 100 stares, hear the whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Isn't that James Mitchell? With his assistant? The bride, his ex-fiancée of 3 years, turned from her position at the altar, her perfect smile faltering for just a moment when our eyes met. That's when I knew this wedding was about to become something no one in attendance would ever forget. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life drama stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Your support means everything, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this wild journey. I never planned to become the center of attention at someone else's wedding. In fact, I never planned to attend Madison Clark's wedding at all. But life has a funny way of throwing you into situations you never imagined possible, especially when you work for someone like James Mitchell. My name is Olivia Parker, and 6 months ago, I was just another executive assistant at Mitchell Enterprises, a rising tech company that had taken Silicon Valley by storm. I was good at my job, organizing schedules, managing emails, arranging meetings, all the things that kept James Mitchell's professional life running smoothly. I prided myself on being efficient, professional, and most importantly, invisible. The perfect assistant is one you don't notice until you need them, and I had perfected that art. James was everything you'd expect from a 35-year-old CEO who had built his company from the ground up, brilliant, demanding, focused, and impossibly handsome in that way that made even the most composed women in the office lose their train of thought. Dark hair that always looked slightly tousled, piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a jawline that could cut glass. But I never allowed myself to think of him that way. He was my boss, and I was his assistant. The line between us was clear and professional. Until the invitation arrived. It came in a cream-colored envelope, the kind of expensive stationery that feels heavy in your hands. I recognized Madison's name immediately. Everyone at the company knew about Madison Clark, the beautiful marketing executive who had been engaged to James for nearly 2 years before their very public breakup 18 months ago. The details of their split were the subject of office gossip for months, though James never spoke of it. The invitation was addressed to James Mitchell and guest, the gold lettering seeming to mock him with its formality. I placed it on his desk along with his morning coffee, expecting him to toss it in the trash or perhaps ignore it entirely. Instead, he stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Olivia," he said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. "Are you free on the 15th of next month?" I checked his calendar, confused. "You have the quarterly board meeting in the morning, but your afternoon is clear." "Not anymore," he said, sliding the invitation across the desk toward me. "We're going to a wedding." I blinked, certain I had misheard him. "We?" "Yes, we. I need a date, and you're the only person I trust not to turn this into a circus." His eyes met mine, challenging me to refuse. "Unless you have other plans?" I didn't have other plans. I rarely had plans that didn't involve work, a sad reality I wasn't eager to admit to my boss. But attending Madison Clark's wedding as James Mitchell's date? It seemed like crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said carefully. "People will talk." "People always talk, Olivia. The question is whether we give them something worth talking about." A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Consider it a bonus assignment. All expenses paid, of course." I should have said no. Every instinct told me to politely decline, to maintain the professional boundary that had served us both well for the past 2 years. But something in his expression, a vulnerability I'd never seen before, made me hesitate. "Why me?" I asked finally. "You could take anyone. Someone who would make Madison jealous, someone who..." I don't want to make Madison jealous, he interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. This isn't about her. It's about showing up with someone I actually enjoy spending time with, someone real. Not some arm candy I barely know. The compliment caught me off guard, warming me in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. Okay, I heard myself say. I'll go. And just like that, my fate was sealed. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of work and unexpected preparations. James insisted on buying me a dress, it's for the company image, he claimed when I protested, and arranged for a stylist to come to my apartment the morning of the wedding. I felt like I was preparing for an undercover mission rather than a social event, and in a way, I suppose I was. The dress he chose was nothing like what I would have selected for myself. It was a deep emerald green that complemented my auburn hair and fair skin, with a neckline that dipped just low enough to be noticeable without being inappropriate. When I tried it on in the privacy of my bedroom, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me in the mirror. She looked confident, elegant, beautiful, even. It was disconcerting. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, sunny but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that seemed almost orchestrated for the outdoor ceremony at the Fairmont Hotel. James picked me up in his sleek black Aston Martin, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. You look beautiful, he said simply when I opened my door, his eyes taking in the dress, my styled hair, the subtle makeup that made my green eyes seem more pronounced. There was something in his gaze that made my heart skip a beat, something I didn't dare analyze. Thank you, I managed, suddenly feeling shy around the man I saw nearly every day. You clean up pretty well yourself. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. Ready to give them something to talk about? I wasn't. Not really. But I nodded anyway, and we drove to the hotel in a comfortable silence that belied the tension I felt building inside me. The Fairmont was transformed for the occasion, with white roses and lilies adorning every surface, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the gathering guests. We arrived just as people were being seated for the ceremony, timing that I suspected was deliberate on James's part. And that's when it happened, the moment we walked through those doors and every head turned in our direction. I felt James's hand on my back, steady and warm, guiding me forward as whispers erupted around us. I caught fragments of conversations. That's his assistant, I heard they've been secretly dating, poor Madison, he definitely upgraded. Madison's mother spotted us first, her perfectly Botoxed face unable to fully express her shock, though her eyes widened noticeably. She leaned over to whisper something to the older man beside her, Madison's father, I presumed, whose head snapped in our direction so quickly I worried for his neck. James led me to seats near the middle, not too close to the front to be obvious, but not so far back that we could be ignored. As we sat down, his hand found mine, fingers intertwining with a familiarity we had never shared before. Breathe, he whispered, his lips close to my ear. You look like you're about to face a firing squad. Aren't we? I whispered back, acutely aware of the eyes still watching us. His low chuckle sent a shiver down my spine. Trust me, Olivia. By the end of tonight, you'll be glad you came. The music started then, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. The groom, a handsome man with kind eyes named Thomas, took his place at the altar, looking nervous but happy. The bridesmaids processed in matching blush-colored dresses, each one stealing glances in our direction as they passed. And then came Madison. I had seen pictures of her, of course. Everyone had. Madison Clark was the kind of beautiful that made people stop and stare, tall and willowy, with blonde hair that fell in perfect waves and features that seemed designed by an artist. In her wedding dress, she was breathtaking, a vision in white lace and silk that floated around her as she moved down the aisle on her father's arm. I felt James tense beside me, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly around mine. I risked a glance at his face, expecting to see pain or regret, but instead found his eyes fixed on me, not on his ex-fiancée. When our eyes met, he smiled, a small, private smile that seemed to say, "I'm exactly where I want to be." It was in that moment, with Madison Clark walking down the aisle to marry another man and James Mitchell looking at me like I was the only person in the room, that I realized this wedding might change everything. The ceremony proceeded as weddings do, vows were exchanged, rings were placed on fingers, a kiss sealed the union. Throughout it all, I was hyper-aware of James beside me, of his thumb occasionally stroking the back of my hand, of the heat of his body next to mine. It felt like we were acting in a play, performing for an audience that couldn't look away, and yet there was something undeniably real in the way he held my hand, in the way his eyes kept finding mine. When the ceremony ended and the newly married couple processed back down the aisle, Madison's eyes locked with James's for a brief moment. Something passed between them, not longing or regret, but a kind of acknowledgement, a closing of a chapter. Then her eyes shifted to me, curiosity and something else, surprise, perhaps, flickering across her perfect features before she moved on, her new husband's arm securely around her waist. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" James murmured as we stood to follow the crowd to the reception. "The ceremony? No. But the reception is where the real performance begins," I replied, surprising myself with my boldness. He laughed, a genuine sound that drew even more attention our way. "Then let's give them a show they won't forget." The reception was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, transformed into a fairy tale setting with thousands of twinkling lights, more flowers than I had ever seen in one place, and tables draped in silk cloths that shimmered in the soft lighting. James and I were seated at a table with people I didn't know, friends of the couple, I assumed, who regarded us with barely concealed curiosity. James played his part perfectly, introducing me simply as Olivia, without mentioning my role as his assistant, his hand resting casually on the back of my chair, leaning in close when he spoke to me. I followed his lead, smiling and engaging in conversation, pretending that being James Mitchell's date was the most natural thing in the world. The questions came, as we knew they would. "So, how did you two meet?" asked a woman whose name I had already forgotten, her eyes darting between us with undisguised interest. "At work," James answered smoothly. "Olivia has been invaluable to me for the past 2 years." "Oh, you work together? What do you do?" This from a man who had been eyeing James with a mixture of admiration and envy since we sat down. I opened my mouth to answer truthfully, but James beat me to it. "Olivia keeps me sane," he said, his eyes meeting mine with a warmth that seemed too genuine for show. "She's the most capable person I've ever met." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I felt a blush creeping up my neck and took a sip of champagne to hide my confusion. The dinner passed in a blur of small talk and stolen glances. James kept up the charade effortlessly, his hand occasionally finding mine under the table, his attention focused on me in a way that made my heart race. I found myself relaxing into the role, enjoying the fantasy of being the woman who had captured James Mitchell's attention. And then came the dancing. The first dance belonged to Madison and Thomas, of course. They moved together with practiced ease, her white dress swirling around them as he guided her across the floor. They looked happy, genuinely in love, and I found myself wondering if James felt any regret watching them. "She looks happy," I said quietly, my eyes on the dancing couple. "She does," James agreed, his voice neutral. "Thomas is a good man. Better for her than I ever was." I turned to look at him, surprised by his candor. "You don't regret it? The breakup?" His eyes met mine, serious now. "The only thing I regret is hurting her. We wanted different things, different lives. It took me too long to admit that." Before I could respond, the music changed, and other couples began joining the newlyweds on the dance floor. James stood, extending his hand to me with a smile that made my stomach flip. "Dance with me, Olivia." It wasn't a request I could refuse, not with everyone watching, not with his eyes holding mine like that. I placed my hand in his and let him lead me to the dance floor, acutely aware of the eyes following our movement. James pulled me close, one hand on my waist, the other holding mine as we began to move to the music. He was a good dancer, confident and graceful, making it easy to follow his lead. I had never been this close to him before, close enough to smell his cologne, to feel the warmth of his body, to see the faint stubble on his jaw that would emerge by the end of the evening. "Everyone is watching us," I murmured, trying to focus on anything but the feeling of his hand on my waist. "Let them watch," he replied, his voice low and intimate. "They're just jealous." "Of what?" His eyes held mine, something unreadable in their blue depths. "Of me, for having the most beautiful woman in the room in my arms." My heart stuttered. This was going beyond the performance we had agreed to, venturing into territory that felt dangerous and thrilling all at once. "James." "I mean it, Olivia." His hand tightened slightly on my waist, drawing me closer. "You're stunning tonight. But then, you always are." I didn't know how to respond to that, how to separate the act from reality. So I didn't say anything, just let him guide me around the floor, trying to ignore the way my body responded to his touch, the way my heart raced when he looked at me like that. The song ended, but James didn't release me. Instead, he kept me close as another song began, his eyes never leaving mine. We danced in silence for a while, lost in our own world despite the crowd around us. "She's watching us," James said suddenly, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear him. I didn't need to ask who. "Is that what you wanted? For her to see you've moved on?" Something flashed in his eyes, frustration, perhaps. "This isn't about her, Olivia. I told you that." "Then what is it about?" I challenged, emboldened by the champagne and the unreality of the evening. "Why am I really here?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching mine as we continued to move to the music. "Finally," he said, "because when I received that invitation, you were the only person I could imagine bringing. The only person I wanted by my side." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. This didn't feel like part of our act anymore, it felt real, and that terrified me more than any performance could have. "James, I'm your assistant," I reminded him, my voice barely above a whisper. "This, whatever this is, it can't be real." "Can't it?" His hand moved from my waist to the small of my back, pulling me imperceptibly closer. "What if I told you I've been fighting this for months? That every morning when you bring me coffee, every late night when we're the only ones left in the office, every time you anticipate what I need before I even know I need it, what if I told you it takes everything in me not to cross that line?" My breath caught in my throat. This couldn't be happening. James Mitchell, my boss, the man whose schedule I managed and whose calls I screened, couldn't possibly be saying these things to me. And yet, the look in his eyes was unmistakable. "You're serious," I said, the realization dawning slowly. "Completely." His eyes never left mine. "This wedding was just an excuse, Olivia. A reason to be with you outside the office, away from the professional boundaries we've both been so careful to maintain." The music faded into the background as I tried to process his words. All this time, while I had been suppressing my own growing feelings for him, convincing myself that the occasional lingering glance or brush of hands was meaningless, he had been feeling the same way. "Say something," he urged when I remained silent, a hint of The moment Elijah Parker's weathered hands pressed against Victoria Reeves' chest, performing CPR in the middle of a crowded restaurant, their lives became irrevocably intertwined, though neither could have predicted how. As the powerful CEO gasped back to life, Elijah slipped away, returning to his daughter waiting at their modest table, never expecting that 6 years later, Victoria would walk through the doors of his struggling neighborhood bookstore with recognition dawning in her eyes. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys that remind us how life's most meaningful connections often begin in unexpected moments. Victoria stood frozen in the doorway of Bookmark, the small independent bookstore tucked away on a quiet street in Rogers Park. Something about the man arranging books by the window had stopped her in her tracks, something in the careful way his hands moved, the slope of his shoulders, the quiet dignity in his bearing. "Can I help you find something?" he asked, turning toward her with a polite smile that faltered when their eyes met. In that moment, Victoria knew. 6 years of searching, of wondering about the stranger who had vanished after saving her life, and here he was, surrounded by books in a dusty shop far from the gleaming corporate towers where she spent her days. "It's you," she whispered, her hand unconsciously rising to touch the small scar on her chest where the defibrillator had been implanted. "You're the one who saved me at Bellini's." Elijah Parker's face registered surprise, then resignation. "Ms. Reeves," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "I'm glad to see you recovered well." The simplicity of his response, no expectation of gratitude, no hint of seeking recognition, struck Victoria deeply. In her world of calculated moves and strategic relationships, such genuine humility was foreign. "Why did you disappear?" she asked, stepping fully into the store. "I've been looking for you for years." Elijah glanced toward the back of the store where his 18-year-old daughter Lily was shelving books, then back to Victoria. "It was my daughter's birthday dinner. You were in good hands with the paramedics. There was no reason to stay." "No reason?" Victoria echoed incredulously. "You performed CPR for 4 minutes. You used the AED. The doctor said without your immediate intervention, would have died or suffered permanent brain damage." Elijah shrugged, uncomfortable with her praise. "Anyone with training would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone. It was you." Victoria looked around the bookstore, noting the worn floors, the carefully mended shelves, the sale signs on too many books. "And now I find you here, running a bookstore that appears to be struggling in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood." Elijah's expression hardened slightly. "We manage." From the back of the store, Lily approached, curiosity evident in her expression. "Dad? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Elijah assured her. "This is Ms. Reeves. She's an old acquaintance." Victoria extended her hand to the young woman. "Victoria Reeves. Your father saved my life 6 years ago, though he's too modest to admit it." Lily's eyes widened. "The woman from Bellini's? On my 12th birthday?" She turned to her father. "Dad, you never told me she was Victoria Reeves." "It wasn't relevant," Elijah said quietly. Victoria studied the pair, the devoted father who had raised his daughter alone after his wife's death, the bright young woman clearly worried about their financial situation. An idea began to form in her mind. "Mr. Parker, I've spent 6 years wondering how to thank the stranger who disappeared after saving my life. Now that I've found you, I hope you'll allow me that opportunity." Elijah's expression grew wary. "That's really not necessary." "Dad," Lily interrupted, "Northwestern's tuition deposit is due next week." Victoria caught the flash of worry that crossed Elijah's face before he masked it. "Northwestern? Congratulations," she said to Lily. "That's my alma mater." "Full scholarship," Elijah said with quiet pride. "But there are still expenses." Victoria made a decision. "Mr. Parker, Apex Innovations has a community investment initiative supporting small businesses in changing neighborhoods. Your bookstore would be an excellent candidate." Would you be willing to discuss a potential partnership? Elijah's expression remained skeptical, but Victoria could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing his pride against his daughter's future. This isn't charity, Victoria added, understanding his hesitation. It's good business and good community relations for Apex. And perhaps, a way for me to close a circle that's been open for 6 years. For the first time, Elijah's guarded expression softened slightly. I suppose there's no harm in talking. As Victoria took a seat at the small reading table near the window, she realized that finding Elijah Parker might be more than just repaying a debt, it might be the universe offering both of them a second chance at something neither knew they were missing.